You know, I want to talk about the word cosplay and how it's used within certain remits, basically. So, for example, I'm speaking about cultures, right? So, I'm going to speak about culture in the UK and culture in the US. There's been conversations online that I've seen over a period about US culture and the influence that it has around the world. And I think for me, from a UK based perspective, London based born perspective, yes, US culture has influenced the world. You know, let's not kid ourselves on that. But I want to talk about how the influence is different to cosplay. Cosplay suggests, in my opinion, something based around a fictional character about you dressing up and, depicting a character from generally like, anime or anything in that kind of regard. But I would say it can be loosely used in ways where you're describing, somebody taking or identifying as, or even more or less sometimes even stealing, culture or identity or something that is synonymous with a certain group. But I believe the culture from the US is influential, and I think that's the main aspect of it. I'm speaking from my perspective. When I grew up, it was around black people generally, right? The area I grew up in was predominantly that. And what we liked was similar. So certain dress senses from the men and women, boys and girls, from how we spoke, certain things that we knew just based on being around the area or what we saw maybe on TV, music, entertainment, fashion, whatever it was, there was an understanding and a relatability with each other. But the US culture now, because we saw that on TV, we heard it on radio, we grew up around it, depending on what era you were from, you grew up around it specifically, very closely to what you grew up around, maybe from your own background. For example, my London based background. So a lot of the time, what we had was UK as well as the US. So it was hard not have influences. We had your American music on the radio, and that was majority of the time based on if you had your knowledge up to date. So you would be definitely influenced based on TV, music, radio, magazines, because that was a thing 90s, early 2000s. And that was my era. So I wanted to make that distinction between cosplay and just influence. We were more so, I would say, if I can speak from my perspective, but generally from the UK, we were mainly influenced. We were maybe seeing more of what the US had to provide and offer, as opposed to us putting on a character and us coming across like we were American. Because that's the kind of vibe I hear or see online about maybe, other cultures incorporating what the US are known for, right? From a dress sense, maybe. But the thing is, I would say black people in general, or just people, we're quite similar. We're all in different areas of the world, but we're quite similar. So what we come across like, it's not like I'm speaking a certain way and I'm coming across a certain way. And in that moment, I'm thinking as an American, for example, the movements, the mannerisms, the talk, the twang, the tone, it's all just part and parcel of growing up in certain environments. And I think it's quite similar, to different environments. Even if, for example, you're in a different part of the world and there's a language difference and it's not, let's just say English, you're going to have people coming across a certain way. And I just think that that's what it is from a human perspective. There will be similarities. But in terms of anything cosplay related, I wouldn't really put it down to that in terms of from my perspective of what I saw growing up in London, in certain predominantly black areas, or even just areas in general that were influenced by, say, hip hop, influenced by different music, different types of entertainment that was coming out from the US, just simply because we grew up around it. Buying Source magazines, buying XSL magazines, buying Rap Page magazines, rap pages. All these are all things I remember seeing and having purchased a few and following the culture, for example, in music. So a lot of the time, I think the whole distinction needs to be had between cosplay, where it seems you're stealing, taking, copying, and not really growing up or having an influence of it in a natural way, where you can say, okay, I remember watching that, as well as, listening to that at the time when I was growing up. And it wasn't anything that I wanted to, I would say, steal or copy in a way where it was just, I don't feel anything from it. It was more of, oh, that's what I know, because you saw that around the area. We saw people from the London areas or UK dressing like people from the UK, incorporating aspects that will be what we will see from American culture. So we always had our style, but we will mix it, So we will wear maybe some of the clothes that were known at that time, some of the name brands, right? But at that time, we will dress and say, okay, that person's from this area, that person's from that area. We can maybe make a distinction that these are the people from these particular areas, but we will have also influence from the US, and not just literally play a role, quote unquote, because that's the vibe I get from cosplay and the whole term around it. But I would say it was generally just a influence that the US had musically, like I say, fashion wise, entertainment wise, because it's a big country. So a lot of the time, that's what it was. It was just that influence and that international appeal that the American markets pushed internationally for us to be able to know what was happening over there. And it's not like we were late. We were up to date. We had radio stations that played music, that played our music, UK music, as well as music around the world. So that's how we kept up to date as well. So a lot of the time, when I hear the word cosplay and I hear the sort of arguments behind it, I can understand when they say, yeah, all right, you're taking someone's culture, you're not being original. That can be understood if that's what's happening in certain environments. But I believe, for example, from a London, UK perspective, and not just London, but just a UK, cosplay is basically different to us being influenced based on us growing up around it. If you grew up around it, I think it's not cosplay. If you grew up around it, literally, this is what was in your area. This is what you heard on radio every day. If your radio was on back in the day, then yeah, I can say that's not cosplay. But anything in regards to, I didn't grow up there, I didn't have an influence of it, but I just look at it from afar, and now I'm incorporating and dressing and doing those aspects from that perspective, then yeah, you can say that's cosplay potentially. But either way, America, you get your props for having your culture when it comes to the influence from a entertainment, fashion, music background. But I will also say it's nothing too deep in terms of, people taking and maybe being inspired by what Americans have done over the years. Because at the end of the day, if it's good, people around the world will take it. People around the world will look into it. But I believe on the flip side, I think Americans just want acknowledgement to say that it's from them, right? Which is cool, which is fine. But I will also make it clear that cosplay from a London, UK perspective, particularly from the whole of UK, generally, we were influenced, especially if you're from black environments, potentially, and mainly, we were influenced, but also had our style, UK style, mixed with the US style. That's generally what it was, and what it's been. Now, today, lines are blurred. Social media, you sometimes don't even know where people are from, right? Because social media is just showing everything. It shows everyone from different areas and different backgrounds and things of that nature. But when it comes to growing up in a particular era, the 90s, 2000, yeah, I would say influence. We weren't playing an image. We weren't putting on a persona to try and act like an American per se. No, it was more of, this is what we watched, we heard, we saw on TV, and we turn on our TV, is there. We didn't have to request it. It's there. We see what Americans are doing. We see what the UK is doing as well. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point, because there's been a few, moments online where, the US culture and people within that environment, particularly black culture, would make their assessments. And like I say, it's all fair, and it all makes sense to be able to say your piece in regards to it. but I would say definitely it was less cosplay, less stealing and taking and not identifying, with more influence, which in turn makes us identify as opposed to just playing a role and a character. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say, and I think it'll be good to hear what people think. But definitely like the video, subscribe, and yeah,